Let's have a wee look at this article, and it's from The Guardian because I knew that they would have the funniest take on it. England riots, how has two-tier policing myth become widespread? Idea has been propagated by Tommy Robinson and others from far right, but claim does not stand up to scrutiny. Is that right? Let's have a look. Amid escalating far-right violence across England and in Belfast over the past week, instigators and apologists for the rioting have sought to spread a pernicious myth. The idea that white far-right protesters are the victims of a two-tier policing system that treats them more harshly because of their race and political views. Leftists have not been getting arrested for the last 10 years over their political views. They do sometimes get fired and kicked out of university for criticising Israel, but that's it. That's it. They can go around all they want and saying, like, screw white people and all that stuff, and, like, nothing happens to them. But as soon as the right wing does anything similar to that, boom, they get a knock at the door, they get the police saying, you're being charged under Section 127 of the 2003 Communications Act. That's been happening for a while. Like, well, but the Guardian, of course, is going to say, don't believe your lying eyes. Like, yeah, very good. That is an idea propagated by Tommy Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, as well as Lawrence Fox and various other social media demagogues in the past few days. On Monday, Nigel Farage claimed that ever since the soft policing of the Black Lives Matter protests, the impression of two-tier policing has become widespread because during the Antifa riots and the BLM riots and all of the other riots, the police were like, oh, I don't know. Remember, guys, we're here to protect you and all this stuff as well. But then as soon as the right-wing riot, oh, Jesus Christ, they round them up. They are efficient at doing it when it comes to the right wing. But whenever it's the left wing, they just don't seem to really care. There was also all the Palestinian riots and everything that's been happening over the last year, essentially, and all that as well. So it's strange that, isn't it? There is, in fact, a two-tier policing system. There is. You cannot say that there isn't, right? Look at the reaction to the right-wing riots and then compare that to the Antifa riots, the BLM riots, and the Palestine riots, right? There was nowhere near as strong a reaction to any of that as there was to this. Yvette Cooper, Keir Starmer, Priti Patel and the Met Police Chief Mark Rowley were all asked about it later in the day. Cooper, Starmer and Patel all rejected the claim. Rowley said nothing but grabbed the reporter's microphone. There are tiers in policing response, said Graham Wetton, who spent 30 years in frontline public order roles with the Met and is the author of a book, How to be a Police Officer. Of course there are, because you make operational decisions appropriate to the severity of the situation, but there are not tiers based on preference or favouritism. The tiers are actually based because there is a certain demographic within the UK who respond in a hell of a way whenever they are held to account. You all know what demographic that is. The police are directly scared of that demographic due to them committing terrorist attacks, so the police actually go out of their way to not upset this particular demographic. The police have admitted this themselves. Right, remember Rotherham? Oh, we just didn't want to be seen as racist. That's what the police said. Right? In fact, The Guardian specifically even wrote about that. What is the origin of the claims? Agitators point to the policing failures that allowed organised grooming gangs of predominantly Asian men to operate in Rochdale in the 2000s. They also claim the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 were treated with kid gloves. They were. We've seen it with our own eyes. The Rochdale abuse was scandalously ignored by the police, but the argument that it was a factor in policing today ignores major reforms to the way child sexual exploitation is treated in the region, including the addition of a specialist unit in Greater Manchester Police and every Ofsted inspection since 2014, finding that Rochdale now responds to reported cases effectively. However, for a very long time, they were not, and the specific reason given for that was because of the ethnicity of the perpetrator, and the police did not want to be seen as racist. To just assume that in the last 10 years that mindset has vanished completely from the police is stupid, right? It's naive to think that that mindset just vanished after that. The BLM protests were qualitatively different from the events of the past week, as disorder in these centrally organised protests was a relatively marginal feature. Draconian sentences were also handed down after the 2011 riots. There was actually plenty of criticism of the BLM policing for being heavy-handed, Wetton said. The Met used in advance of the mounted branch, one of their most impactful tactics, which I've only seen deployed a couple of times in my whole career, and not at any of the incidents in the last week. How have the claims gained traction? Allegations of a two-tier system had gained currency even before the events of the past week, with claims about the policing of the pro-Palestinian protests in the UK since 7th of October. Robert Jenrick, now a Conservative leadership candidate, claimed in March that two-tier policing had governed the police's handling of those protests. Because basically the BLM riots, the Antifa riots, and the Palestinian riots did not get this kind of response, where like 2-3 days later after getting arrested, people were getting like 3-year, 4-year sentences. People were getting rounded up at their homes. The police were immediately identifying everyone involved, even though they're all masked up, just like the BLM, Palestine, and Antifa rioters were. And the police were like, oh, we don't know who they are. But now, suddenly, having a mask on your face doesn't matter. They fucking know who you are immediately. Where was all of that before? Again, don't believe your lying eyes. Meanwhile, those on the far right have claimed that the treatment of recent unrest in Hare House, Leeds after children from a Roma family were taken into care revealed that the police were unwilling to act when the agitators were from a minority background. This has been a pattern within the police. Basically, if they know a certain demographic are going to kick off, the police take a step back. Convenient to know. And videos have circulated on social media in recent days of what are claimed to be Asian gangs attacking white protesters with impunity, which I've seen these. Like, these are all on Twitter. You can go and look at them and you can see, I mean, just the other day, they all stormed a pub and just started beating people up because they were white. But these claims do not stand up to scrutiny either. We've seen the videos. We've seen it. All of the evidence of those who attended and monitored the Gaza protests, there's literal video evidence of them doing exactly that. All of the evidence of those who attended and monitored the Gaza protests suggested that while there were pockets of disorder, the vast majority of those who attended did so peacefully. That's the same case here. You know, a lot of people attending the current riots are doing so peacefully. However, there is a violent element among them, as is the case with essentially every single protest, no matter who is doing it. There were arrests and police identifying offences that have led to prosecutions, Wetton said, but those who stayed within the law and were respectful were rightly allowed to protest. That is not the case. I've seen people getting arrested for certain things that they have shouted, things like send them back, no more immigrants, Muslims go home, blah, blah, blah. And even though that is, well, should be protected freedom of speech, they were being arrested for saying those things. The circumstances in Hare House were very different. It started out looking like a standard call that many officers will go to, an incident at an address with social services trying to remove children, said Wetton. And then it blew up with officers coming under attack, and because of how quickly it escalated, withdrawal is the best tactic. Some of the videos of Asian gangs do appear to be real recordings from the past few... They are real recordings from the past few days. They are. And there was a troubling confrontation between the far right and a group of Asian men in Bolton. But the scale of these incidents pales in comparison with the far right activity of the... Oh, yeah, I realise that that's kind of bad, but quickly, guys, look at this other thing that serves my views. It's like, fuck off. But the scale of these incidents pales in comparison with the far-right activity of the past week and does not justify headlines framing events of Sunday as equal clashes between the two sides. Clearly, there have been some incidents, Wetton said, but it doesn't seem to be pre-planned in the same way. Oh, so even though incidents are happening because they weren't planned beforehand, I guess it's fine, then... Also, they were planned, like the Muslims were meeting up in the streets. You saw them all posting on Facebook and rounding up together. They've even formed the Muslim Defence League, who all went out with like knives and bats and all this other stuff as well. And the police were saying, can you kindly put your weapons back in the mosque before you go out? Thanks, guys. We're here to keep you safe. And everyone, shut up. Just shut up. How has the violence of the past week been policed? The level of persistent violence put it in a qualitatively different category to the other policing operations that have been mentioned. So does the fact that the initial protests, which later turned into riots, were not organised in consultation with the police. Chief Constable B.J. Harrington, the national leader for public order policing, put it like this. We have not seen this level of violence or planned intent of violence from other large marches. This is not about being frustrated or wanting to give the police the runaround to get publicity. This is about trying to frighten communities, damage property, and attack police officers. A different approach was therefore warranted, Wetton said. It isn't about numbers, it's about risk and the threat that people pose. all the exact same stuff happened during the Antifa riots, the Palestine riots, and the BLM riots. It's all the exact same thing. People are running around, setting things on fire, throwing bricks at police officers. They're being violent. They're destroying property. All the exact same stuff is happening. However, they were dealt with kid gloves. We seen it. We saw it with our very own eyes. And basically, when The Guardian posted this article on Twitter, it got community noted, showing all the times that in the past where Guardian was like, there is a two-tier policing system that directly attacks Muslims and black people, blah, 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 and everything. Of course, the Guardian was being hypocritical. Of course, a two-tier policing system exists when it lines up with their views, but when the reality doesn't, they will just simply deny that a two-tier policing system exists. Two-tier Keir is trending for a reason.